consider that these 4 minutes of delay in starting mean that you really got to take your seats.
Merci.
Thanks to the photographers and the cameramen. So thanks to the press, we'll start.
Tout le monde va gagner sa place.
So I'd like to ask everybody to take their seats.
Je suis heureux d'accueillir en votre...
I'm very glad, on your behalf, to receive the guests who are joining us, and I'd like to ask you to greet Timmy Dooley. Co-president of EDP, Carlo Calenda, who's the leader of Azione, Stéphane Séjourné, President of Renew Europe, Matteo Renzi, leader of Italia, Viva. And I'll be giving the floor for an introduction to this discussion to close the morning to Sylvie Brunet and Nicola Dante. Thank you. Dear friends, before giving the floor to our prestigious guests, just a few words to say that the values which unite us in the EDP and the Renew Europe group mean that we want to be central to European life. We know that a Democrat is someone who looks for balance constantly in the community they belong to. We want unity within diversity, want to defend the rule of law and the basic rights, women's rights, and diversity. We want a Europe which can give concrete responses to our citizens and to manage the crises before us, social, climate crisis and the war on our doorstep. And we also want sustainable development for the future generations. Nicola, thank you, François, thank you all. I'd like to welcome Stéphane, president of our group, and the other invited speakers. For those of us who 2 years ago decided to enter Renew Europe, this is a very important day, because not only over these 3 years have we entered the Renew group, but we've strengthened the Italian position within the EDP. But with the elections, we will now be main actors in European politics. Europe has major challenges, has had major challenges to face. We've dealt with them: the pandemic, the war, and the energy crisis. Today we discovered one thing, that we need more Europe to manage the difficulties we have before us. And to do this, there are two paths. One is to leave Europe to be managed by bureaucracy, and another is to have Europe managed by politics. And for that, we need strong European parties and groups which say the same things in their own capitals and in Brussels. And this is what we want to do. So this is a very important discussion. Thank you to Carlo and Matteo for being with us. And there's one person I'd like to thank, Gianluca Susta, because over the years, Gianluca has kept the flame burning in the Democratic Party in Italy. We're present in strength today, but he's somebody who's kept the flame burning thanks to Gianluca, and to everybody. Thank you. So now the floor to Sandro Gozi, Secretary General of the EDP. Thank you. Thank you, François. Thank you to all of you. I'm very, very glad to host you here in Rome at this Congress, which is very important, what's happening in Italy and for what's happening in Europe and the EDP. Just like to take a couple of minutes to express some thanks. Stéphane Séjourné first. Stéphane Séjourné, I think you should rent out a flat in Rome, because since you're here every 2 or 3 weeks, in terms of your quality of life might improve. If you had a pad here in Rome, and at the end of election campaign on 25th of September, you're here today, and I'm sure that you'll be here in future too. I'd like to remind you of the major responsibilities Stéphane in France with Renaissance, and I'm sure that Renaissance and the European Democrats will work increasingly closely. I also want to thank a friend, not just a friend, but not just a leader, but a friend, Matteo Renzi. Thank you for the trust you've always placed in the European Democrats, and thank you also for what you're doing for the new Renew Italy project, which is a project which has been the only real new thing in the election campaign. So I want to thank Carlo Calenda, who headed our list at Séjourné, Italia, Viva. And we express our congratulations and our gratitude, because we're convinced that this was the only positive element in the election campaign, but we're always looking at doubling our support in the European elections with our Renew Italy project. It's a proposal I'm putting to the two leaders, and many thanks to Timmy Dooley. I was in Dublin representing the EDP at the conference of our Liberal allies. We're working very well together among Liberals and European Democrats with our differences. So thank you, Timmy, for being here. Europe will be the sum of the solutions we provide to a crisis. Jean Monnet said this, he's still right. And some people might ask, but isn't the European project showing cracks? Will they make it? Will the nationalists in Sweden, in Hungary, and now in Italy and Poland succeed in making our union implode and European values? I think the Russian attack against Ukraine, the return of nationalists in important countries, is something which we should consider as a shock therapy. A new beginning of the European Union is possible, and a new European Union can take shape. I'm using this anatomic analogy to compare nationalism to a virus, and faced by this virus, our vaccine is called Sovereign and Democratic Europe. It will be a tough battle, of course, but even at the worst of times, there are signs of renewal, signs of hope. Look at what's happening here in Italy. I was saying in my introduction, of course, we have a right-wing extremist winning the elections. For us as Democrats, this is something which sends a shiver down our spine. And particularly when in Rome people continue to speak of a centre-right, when there's a far-right party leading the government, and there is a party like Forza Italia, which is a basis for the majority of the far-right party. But I'm still an optimist. I'm an optimist because the future in Italy is called European Democrats and Renew Europe, Renew Italy. From 2019, we've been central to European politics. We've been decisive for all the goals which have been attained in this Parliament, and we will be even more in future. We're the true democratic republic and a pro-European alternative to a far right and to an increasingly populist right. Let me recognize the great merits of François Bayrou in this. François, you've always had the merit of keeping open, bravely, with vision, with justified obstinacy, this central political space, even when it seemed impossible, even when everybody told us that the present and the future of politics would be shared by the Socialists and the People's Party, centre-right and centre-left, using these expressions, denying the presence of an independent central position. It's in this space that Emmanuel Macron built his victory in 2017 and 2022, and it's in this space that Emmanuel Macron built up the European leadership, which we all recognize. And it's in this space that we conduct our political battles today, and it's thanks to us that the European Union has committed itself strongly to rule of law, to development, the green belt, the digital reform, a social Europe, and I want to commend the work of Sylvie Brunet and this energy. And we have members of the European Parliament who are much committed to this future of Europe, and transnationalists to elect some of the European members of Parliament. This is us, this is our results. This courage, this desire for change in Europe and in Italy will be the renewable energy of our success in the 2024 European elections. We Europeans are a civilization. We want to safeguard our democracy, and we want to become a power, civilization, democracy and power. The European political community, which was launched by Emmanuel Macron the other day in Prague, is an initial step to build a new step of security and cooperation in Europe. We're at a point of transition like the one in Helsinki in 1996 or Berlin 1989. A true journey is not seeking out new lands, but having new eyes, Marcel Proust wrote. So we have to demonstrate we have new eyes and that we have the same sense of history as the founding fathers before us. We need to reinvent Europe, and reinventing ourselves means recovering a true European sovereignty, consolidating our democracies and building a new power faced by aggressive empires like China and Russia. A historical transition which is difficult but of great importance for us Europeans, because Europe, after two European civil wars, the two world wars, was seen as an antidote to the use of national power or nationalist power, worse. Today we're called upon to construct a European power, military, digital, environmental, energy and industrial power. This is the great challenge of our generations, creating a real European sovereignty. So I'd like to repeat today, as we did in Milan when we launched the election campaign with Carlo Matteo, we are the true sovereignists, because only through a sovereign Europe will we be able to regain power and regain control and power. A stronger Europe has to go hand in hand with a more democratic Europe. There's a major democratic issue in many European countries, in Italy, Germany and France and elsewhere, as there is in the United States and elsewhere. We must reinvent democracy at all levels, local to transnational, and the new democratic question is the deep issue of the European Democratic Party. Democracy must be regenerated, uniting local areas in the European Union and making municipal councillors and European MPs work together, straddling the boundaries between our countries, which are only scars of the past. More effective and legitimate democracy, a more rapid and just politics to regain those electors who, having lost their confidence, express their anger by looking for the latest nationalist and populist in the substance is the same in all the countries. There are different names to these populist parties, and we have to re-give trust and confidence with concrete solutions. the great challenge of our time, which requires is strong and brave solutions. So we have to eliminate the distance between local communities and Brussels, and at the same time transform the European Union, do away with the vetoes, and promote effective relations and elect the President of the European Union. This will all double the electoral power of our citizens and will strengthen our sense of belonging in common to a great human community. And you said that when people have a common will, their breath tends to synchronize. Our breath tends to synchronize us in a single body. Let us continue to have this common will, and let us together renew Europe. Thank you, Sandro. Thank you for all your work at the as General Secretary. Timmy Dooley has the floor. Co-President of the ADLE.
Dear François, dear Sandro, thank you so much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be invited to Rome on any occasion, but certainly at an event like this, it's my considered pleasure to be here with you and with friends who share a lot in common. I want to first of all thank you for the opportunity for addressing this assembly today and for an opportunity to have a discussion at a later stage. As you know, indeed, the EDP and ALDE share many things. One of them is the same group in the European Parliament, and we remain the third largest political force there, led by Stéphane Séjourné in the Renew group. And I believe we have a challenge ahead of us for the next election to address the issues that you've rightly identified, Sandro, and I'm sure which we'll hear later over the course of these discussions. But I think our relationship as parties goes beyond just our association within the Renew group. The ALDE party and our members have, from the very beginning of their existence, some more than a century ago, been and remain the driver of force for change in our societies. We strive for societies to remain open and progressive. We strive for economies that deliver jobs, growth, prosperity, and happiness for our citizens. We exist at the end of the day for our citizens. Whether we call ourselves liberals or Democrats, we know our values are under threat. They're under significant threat. Our values are under threat not just here in Italy, but in the rest of Europe. We have all seen the election results in several member states, and we have seen the actions of those that have been elected. And you referred to them, Sandro, in your introduction. We see the issues in Sweden, Slovenia, Poland, and indeed Hungary. Even though those who seek to divide Europe have become much better at communicating, their ideology remains the same. That of undoing Europe's greatest achievements. The greatest achievements really is our union, its values, and what it stands for. If you look at it in terms of being a significant peace process right from the start, then it has been a tremendous success. But peace on our continent is now under threat. It's under threat because of the actions of an evil dictator. And we see others emerging who, if they're given the same latitude, may ultimately reach that point in the not-too-distant future. So the challenge for us is to stick together now against that aggression. And of course, Putin has put all our political parties under pressure in the way in which he's waging war. He's using tactics that we hadn't seen before: migration, energy, food, as weapons of war, weapons to undermine our democratic values, our democratic principles, effectively trying to steer our citizens towards nationalists and dictatorship in the end. We need to be better at thinking through those common challenges and common solutions, whether it's by providing more help, as I said, to our Ukrainian allies, addressing the living costs and crises that is accelerating the cost of energy. And we really do, as a group of nations, as a union, come together in addressing our transition away from fossil fuels, move much towards renewables and the reduction during the next number of months. Reforms that make Europe fit for the future, deliver growth, jobs, prosperity and welfare for our children and for the next generations. That has to be at the core of everything that we do, individually, collectively, and it has to be part of the platform that we put forward as we face into the next European elections. These are things that I think will only be accomplished by working together, whether in national or European parliaments or indeed at council level. We have to become much more coherent, and I think it's a common thread of what I've been hearing here already today. We've got to speak to a great extent with one voice. We have to be much more coordinated even between our national and our European politicians. Even within the same parties, there's often a level of digression, which I think we need to address sooner than later. So I'll conclude with a quote that I really like from the late John F. Kennedy, who in his inaugural address said, and I quote, "United there is little we cannot do in a host of cooperative ventures. Divided there is little we can do, for we dare not meet a powerful challenge at odds and split asunder." Thank you all, and I wish you a very successful conference over the course of the day. Thanks again.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Timmy. Je donne la parole à...
I give the floor to Carlo Calenda, and thanking him for his action at the head of your alliance.
Allora, innanzitutto vi ringrazio molto per...
At the outset, I wish to thank you for inviting me today. We feel at home here, firstly, because the person who is in charge of European policies is Jean-Claude Juncker, who is your vice president. And from this standpoint, I believe that it is now the time for us to form a single group within the European group with Nicola Danchi, to decide to become members of the PDE with conviction, with action, so that together with Matteo and the friends of Italia Viva, we can stand united. And in the weeks to come, Gianluca will be tabling our formal application, and we will keep the same name we have in Italian Parliament. And there is a tradition that we feel is our own, and sorry for my boast, which is that of progressive liberalism, the idea of coexistence between the strength of man in his individual sphere to create well-being, wealth, and to discover and develop, and at the same time in society to stand together in a vision that is not purely liberal. It's not an idea of liberty, simply liberty within the state, but rather liberty promoted by the state, and from and with a profile that progressive people have lost in Italy, and this profile is emancipation. In Italy now, we are in a very peculiar but interesting position. Tomorrow, this might happen in other countries, and we share this with France, a progressive party that, with every passing days, moves towards the five-star party, populist maximalism, and we have a right wing that is ever more right wing. Today in Parliament, pro-Putin man, an anti-abortion man, linked in the past to Golden Dawn and such parties, will probably be elected as Speaker of the Chamber of Deputies. So this is a situation of populism that you witness in France in the same way. But here we want to be the embodiment of pragmatism, good governance, and also the possibility of doing away with the idea of having a job without training or wealth without work. So our situation is pragmatic, is liberal, progressive, democratic, and our policy line is your policy line as well, and is coming under very strong attack throughout Europe and will be ever more so. And this is why I believe and hope that we shall be able to work from EDP, a broad European area. We need it. And this because it is true that inside the liberal area, inside the Renew group, there are different sensitivities. Classical liberals, classical progressives, liberals that are perhaps too right-wing. But it is our task to put together all these different souls, because in spite of all their differences, they share this common European approach, this intransigence for post-fascist parties or left-wing populist groups, and the idea that Europe together with the United States form an axis which will be a decisive one in the years to come. I believe that this battle today is a difficult battle. It goes against the tide of history at times. But in the years to come, we shall find ourselves in a world which is a more difficult world. Geopolitical crises bring about other geopolitical crises. When one is triggered, such as the one in the Ukraine, others inevitably follow. So we need to be prepared to rebuild an outlook which is not only a European one, but an Atlantic one that is more robust. I'm thinking about the negotiation we have foregone, the one that had been initiated by President Obama for a free trade area between Europe and the United States. We really need a close, strong relationship between the major democracies of the world, trade ones, economic ones, and in this field, even the countries that are outside the West or liberal democracy be penalized. It is unthinkable that, quite plainly, we accept as normal the arrival of a right-wing government, knowing that that government denies all the principles that underpin Europe. And when extreme right governments, when populists come to government, they start using different words. Ms. Meloni, when she was the leader of the opposition, she said, "Sink the ships with migrants. I'm going to leave the Europe. I'm going to plunge Europe into a failure." But now she dons a Draghi-like mask, and we see what is happening these days. there's still this imprint which is not fully democratic, and it's incompatible to stand high in Europe. So really, we need to start off with the EDP and Azione, together with Italia. We'll give it support to build a bulwark of democracy in Europe and in our member states, where we need to start cooperating. We must do so strongly to stop this wave of right-wing populism and left-wing populism. This is our commitment. This is what we engage to do together with you. And our commitment with Matteo is to be among the first Italian parties at the European elections. Everything moves towards that achievement. And there's this really strong will to stop this bi-populism, the awareness that today in the Italian Democratic Party, we no longer have those elements that made of it a reformist party. We are the reformist party. Our federation is reformist, and this is the work we'll do with you as from tomorrow. Thank you.
Merci, Carlo.
Thank you, Carlo. Now the floor to Stéphane Séjourné, President of the Renew Europe Group at the European Parliament. Thank you very much, Chairman, dear François. Thank you for allowing me to take the floor before you. First of all, perhaps I'd like to start by the insight behind the establishment of the EDP in 2004. François Bayrou told us that Europe was moving to the center. It was an insight, and this is something which has taken shape clearly today, and we've followed this process in the European Parliament since 2019. With all the progressive Liberal Democrat forces in the European Parliament, we've increased our vote by about 95% in the European Parliament. This group has become the heart of the European Parliament, and in particular has the responsibility of steering and drafting the texts at the European Parliament. I look at the MPs who are here, and this bet we made in the founding of the EDP with the members of the other political groups and parties has succeeded. Since 2019, Renew Europe has political responsibility. The European Parliament has heavy responsibility at a time of political crisis, which we have with the health crisis and the energy crisis we face together. This was our first political victory since 2019, and at the Congress of our party, we can be very proud. We can lay claim to the fact that we organized this process. We can speak this out very openly, and I have full confidence in our European members of Parliament to continue on the path they've traced out over the last 2 years, and we will have crises and major decisions to make before us. And perhaps I can also say something about the Democrat issue, because today this Democrat family has been a source of inspiration for pro-Europeans, as we all are, who believe in a united Europe, a democratic and a joined Europe, a democratic Europe, which has a voice in the world, and all this aspiration of European Democrats. And I am also the inheritor of this, with the responsibilities which you have attributed to me in the European Parliament with the presidency of the Renew Group. This will is even more topical today. I think if we see what's happening in Ukraine, with a democracy having its fundamental rights attacked, and we see the presence of populists everywhere in Europe, and when we see that, European democrats are trying to unite. The Italian case is a perfect example. Unity of European democrats in political coherence so as to face the mounting wave of populism. We've done this in France twice. We've erected a dam against the wave of populism in 2021, 2022 in the presidential elections. I don't know whether the political project which François Bayrou and Emmanuel Macron had, if they hadn't set up this project, what the future of the country would have been. This dam which we have built with the centre, with this new political offer, is something which should be exported and make this a European political offering and export it everywhere where we are in peril and where the far right and the far left endanger democratic values in Europe. And we had this Italian epilogue. I was there, and Sandro was joking about this, but I certainly need to rent a flat in Rome, dear Sandro, dear Carlo, dear Matteo, because every 3 weeks, basically, I come to the Italian capital for various events. And Italy is central to Europe. Europe needs Italy. Italy needs Europe, and Europe can't be built without Italy. Political congresses, the most important electoral meetings in recent months, in recent years, and perhaps the embryo of what you built in Italy in just in the space of a few months. And in the space of a few months, despite the disappointing results, the political offering which you've striven to build in Europe, in Italy, and with a result which is more than satisfactory, with the possibility and I see perhaps hasty conclusions, but we'll need you for the 2024 elections, and we count on you to have a major Italian group in the European Parliament. We count on you to increase the Renew Europe and its continuing presence in the European Parliament, and to continue with this 95% growth rate, and have this a major Italian presence in the European Parliament, which will cement our presence and our strength. Political unity always starts from a debate, and you've been able to establish a debate among you, and it's always a political battle to conduct a debate. Is something which has to be waged internally, externally, and there are a number of other political parties. I'm thinking of Più Europa to join you in the coming weeks and months. I think that's the logic of the construction process you've engaged in, and certainly this is the logic within which we'll be supporting you in coming weeks and months. Finally, dear friends, perhaps a word about the role of our political family in the coming months. We need to respond to a paradox, namely that the Europeans say permanently that we have to be more pro-European. The polls in favor of the European Union are very expressive, looking at the barometer in all European countries. The successive crises, the health crisis, the energy crisis, lead to the European people asking us for a European response. We're the only group in Europe capable of providing coherent responses, and at the national level, the growth of the extreme groupings is before us. And so we have to consider that the needs of Europe and the will of European people is to build a European response. And at the same time, in the national context, there is more and more support given to the extreme groups. And so the offering made in Europe has to be organized among ourselves, and we have to be able to disseminate this throughout Europe. Coming here to Rome is an excellent idea. It shows us that European family, the Democrat family, can branch out throughout Europe, and there is a European response to things. And the specificity EDP is also its local action and present, something we want to build with the Committee of Regions, something which is also embodied a number of regional parties in our midst. And we also have to demonstrate this with our actions, and the initial responses we have to give in future months is the energy crisis. The energy crisis will obviously have an implication on the daily lives of Europeans, on the utility bills, and together with other responses we'll need to give at Europe, purchasing gas together, for example, as we did for vaccines, we'll be able to show that our political offering is worth it for the everyday lives and needs of Europeans. So thank you for having established links between national and European politics. It's a vital link, and this link we can take at European level. It's important for all Europeans, and which is important for the daily lives and expenses of the European population. We have to demonstrate that we are responsible in Europe, but I know that you've been doing this, and so long live Europe, long live the EDP.
Merci Stéphane.
Thank you, Stéphane. I am very, very happy to give the floor over to Matteo Renzi after this round of applause to you. François and Sandro, it is a pleasure to be here. And it is a pleasure to recall 2004 and all the work François did. He, together with Francesco Rutelli, who was a co-founder, together with François Bayrou, of this political experience, and Rutelli was one of the best mayors of Rome. With Carlo, I often discuss the administration of Rome, this city, which is beautiful, almost as beautiful as Florence. I need to give some time for interpretation, but this city needs an administration. This city needs an administration which is up to its beauty, and but it certainly had a good management under Rutelli. And Rutelli was one of the founders with François of the EDP. We're happy to see Azione that will soon be joining the EDP, as Carlo said. But all this is a wonderful experience for Europe and the entire world. I'd like to put together 3 words: party, actually, European Democratic Party. Today, the forms of politics are an issue. American friends know this full well. They are faced with the
Donald Trump
complexity of putting together the Tea Party, Donald Trump, and conservatism. Bush presidency would appear to be an absurd for Americans. And this the Democratic Party supporters know in America. They are worrying about the post-Biden period. What will happen in the most radical left, Elizabeth Warren, Ocasio-Cortez, and those who are closest to the Clinton and Obama experience? How can, in one party, how can you have them stay together in a party, though the primaries, which form consensus, now are under the impact of social media, and politicians just think about their posts, their likes, their tweets, and less and less about future generations. But this stands true in the United States, in the United Kingdom. What the UK Conservatives have done is an unprecedented disaster. I'm not saying that they change prime ministers every 2 years, because the Italian pattern is certainly something difficult to achieve. But at the same time, the new British leader has decided to open her season in government in a special way. And in 1 week, then she backtracked and held a party convention to try and put everything back together again. And Blair was linked to the Labour Party. But after Blair, the Labour people never even won the lottery. So really, what can we say about democracy outside Europe? And a party that is thinking over things as you are in France is important. In France, you have a great leader and it's Emmanuel Macron, who we hail from this assembly. You have a leader in Emmanuel Macron. You have time. You have over time built this leadership. Of course, you had En Marche, and En Marche did a lot from 2014 to 2016. But François took a step back, allowing Macron to go to the ballot. And really, that was a really major step, and we must say thank you, because this teamwork was important. Renaissance is fascinating. It's a fascinating experience, and through Renaissance, you are pointing in a direction that I believe is very interesting. What is a party? Together with Carlo, we had a difficult start. We didn't think we'd go to early elections. If you have one has Mario Draghi on the team, do you send someone like Mario Draghi home and then pick a clumsy Meloni? So, of course, now the time has come to build not only an opposition to the Meloni government, because we will be an opposition force, but we shall be an intelligent one, thinking about the good of the country, and that is how we shall work in government in a far-sighted manner, but at the same time laying down foundations, laying down the groundwork with the EDP and Renew Europe. We want to build a school for political training and have this in Ventotene, thinking about he or those who spoke about the United States of Europe. And then there's another issue, democracy. And democracy has come under a crisis everywhere. There's a crisis in Japan. I come from Abe Shinto's funeral. The situation in Japan is difficult. Democracy is undergoing a crisis in Europe. It's undergoing a crisis everywhere in the world, and autocracy portray great efficiency. That's their message. And technically, it's understandable because you're not accountable to anyone. And in that way, you wield greater power. But the mission of the EDP is to propose a new form of democracy and relaunch our battles, our battle for direct election of the President of the European Commission, the battle for Europe to become the house of democracy. Because when we are between China and the United States, we cannot express our views. It's no chance that President Obama chose to organize a forum on democracy. And its foundation will open a presidential library in Chicago. And now I come to Europe. I believe that the times are difficult. These are hard times, very hard times, because some words were almost old-fashioned a few years ago. If we were told that we'd speak about war, lockdown, energy rationing, curfews, we would never have believed that, because these are words that bring us back to the past century, a century of divisions. But now we are we're living these hard times that were even underestimated. The risk of a political debacle in the European Union has been underestimated. So this means that we need to be strongly on the side of the Ukraine. We must be convinced of this. We were among the first who voted in favor of sanctions to Russia and in favor of sending armaments to the Ukraine. And we also said that we who in our government experience had made a proposal on Donbass to make it an area just like our Alto Adige, with an international agreement leaving territorial integrity as we have in Italy, leaving it to the Ukraine, and also protect the population in Italy, which was a German-speaking one, and which in Donbass was a Russian-speaking one. And we relaunched this idea because it's the only one that can lead to an international agreement. But the dramatic thing in all this is that we, as Europe, either we become protagonists, and President Macron drew our attention to this time and again, or we just risk being a theater, a scenario for a challenge that has nothing to do with our values. The intuition of a European army. We who believe in the United States of Europe, we who believe in the energy sovereignty for Europe. We who believe in the educational and cultural values of Europe. We who believe in a European identity, because we just don't leave the term identity to populists. Our ideals are the ideals of Rome, of our cities, of beauty, of the culture of our museums. These are values that we open to others. We're not afraid, but they are our genetic makeup. And we need to think about the Europe we want. We, the United States of Europe, we want a shared European dream, a dream we can share. And every time Giorgia Meloni will say that she's a sovereigntist, we shall raise our voices high to say that we believe in the United States of Europe. Every time she will speak about protectionism, we shall explain why freedom in Europe is a fundamental value. And we also believe that since the right-wing government, which is about to be born, is a right-wing government, that is not our government, and I don't think that they will be sawing off the branch on which they sit. We will see that they will have gone through a populist campaign, political campaign, but they will soon discover that Next Generation Youth and all the other European policies are not a favor we're doing to Europe, but a choice of Europe for our children, for our future. Meloni and Salvini will understand this too. Later than others, but they will understand. And EDP for us is not just an acronym, it's a challenge, a noble challenge for policies with a capital P. With politics with a capital P. And we will do this with Nicola, Sandro, Carlo, Gianluca, all those who will come, because we want to elect a good group of European parliamentarians for a number of reasons. First of all, to give a hand to renew EU, because we want to, we know that we need to govern from the center. Wait, don't. The Italians are clapping their hands. No, don't. I come to the important point. We need to be successful and strong, so that at the presidency of the European, after so many years of popular leadership, there be a change of the guard at the head of Europe, so that inside institutions there be a strong presence of our family. Because, dear friends, and I'm saying this to our friends, this is when their honeymoon is starting, the government's honeymoon. And it won't be the most exciting one because of the last few years, because they have so many difficult things to do. And Carlo and I will be in opposition, and intelligently so. But if we roll up our sleeves, and if we are truly committed and we engage, and I want to be more optimistic than Carlo, and that's a major endeavor. But we want to become the first party of Europe, so that we can have a bearing not only in Europe, but in Italy as well. So, bonne chance and good luck.
Cher Matteo.
Dear Matteo, why only in Italy? There's no reason for us to limit our ambitions. And I'm very glad of this meeting in Rome, which allows me, in starting, to correct a historic injustice. When you ask intellectuals, historians, and members of the public to ask where democracy originated, generally people say Athens. And it's a historical mistake, because The democracy in Athens was considerable progress. The Athenians put to the world that power did not come from above, that it could come from below with the aid of the gods, because the Athenians decided that leaders should be selected by drawing lots. But it was in Rome that elections were invented. It was in Rome that they invented this unprecedented procedure whereby each citizens of Rome were, and later the citizens of the Roman Empire, were given the right to choose their leaders. And this is why democracy, as we understand it, as we love it, and as we defend it, was born in Rome. And it's right to state this in this place, which is almost it coincides in the exact place where this originated. And I'm very glad that our European Democratic Party has met with success today, and at a time for Italy and for Europe, which is a key moment. What you have experienced in the Italian elections around Carlo and Matteo with the support of Sandro, what you have experienced in our eyes is something truly historic. Now, you've been kind enough to remind us that the battle to defend and promote the EDP is something which we waged, and Sandro and Matteo here. We initially undertook this battle with Romano Prodi and then with Francesco Rutelli, and both of us following different paths and different sensitivities. Both of them were pillars at the time when this current was established, which afterwards we had the good fortune of making triumph in France. The EDP originated from an idea to which I wouldn't change a word, namely that it wasn't possible for European democratic life to be defined in a division into two poles, so that on all issues there were two organizations facing off against each other, who actually as divided in their interior as they are between each other. There was something which we found totally stupid, and we thought that the only procedure to respect the principles, the values, and the reality of things too was to bring people together so as to overcome these bipolar oppositions, to establish in the center of European political life a force respecting freedom and liberty, and seeking and respecting diversity, and seeking democracy. And we can prove that this is where the best aspirations for the future of Europe lie. So European Democratic Party is central to European political life, so that European political life can find its future and its path. The Italians have had a very important role, the Italian leaders I've mentioned. Now, if I can make a modest comment on Italian political life, I do this with great caution, knowing how people are, they may be susceptible, but as I can also easily take offense. I'm very, very careful in what I'm going to say. You've been victims of a political con job because it is a political con job to having the left and calling the left the center-left and the right center-right. The center doesn't need adjectives. The center is the center, and it needs to be defined on its own, not adding further adjectives which shift it in one direction or the other. In Italy in recent years, it wasn't the center-left against center-right. It was left versus left, where there was esteemed people with right, but you are the center in Italy. It's what is you are reconstructing, and that center can open for Italy a future which up to now was not envisaged or could not come to fruition for a number of years. So I would modestly, as a very humble Frenchman, Pyrenean who is aware of what he is, I would like to encourage you to call yourselves by your name, to claim your identity, and to say today that Renew is the central force in Italy, the future for Italy. And I'd like to stop a second, Matteo. Me too, on this idea of democracy. What is democracy? It is an civic attitude. Democracy can't be separated from citizenship. That is why every time in Eastern Europe in particular, there have been claims of liberation. Civic or civil has often been used as a word to denote this. It's a civic attitude. So something which has become very rare in the world we live in, where all citizens feel themselves responsible of the future of their country, whether they be on one side, on the other, or from the center, whether they be in the majority or in opposition. Today, most of the political outlooks have a single attitude, which is to condemn what's around them, and sometimes, mostly, this is very justified, but I want to give you an idea of the ideal world I am battling for. For a long time I thought, like everybody, that democracy meant making one's idea prevail over those of others. And I believe today that things are much more complex than that. A true democracy is one where one has the power to defend one's ideas, accepting that others defend theirs. As in music, in a symphony, everyone has their instrument, but everybody feels at home in the score and playing their instruments together. And this is why I do not believe, and I think this is a reflection we need to undertake. I don't believe in political theories which seek a maximum conflict on all issues, who want maximum confrontation on all issues. And I know that in France we're very familiar with that because, as you know, political life in France is unfortunately withered with the emergence of populism, two extremisms, one right-wing extremism, which has been visible for a long time, and a left-wing extremism, which is arrogant, shocking, insulting. And I'm saying this from our colleagues in the French National Assembly. This is truly a country I say constantly that if the television networks in France did not cut out the microphones of the Parliament in France to only hear the speaker in Parliament, you'd see so many shouts, so many people insulting, swearing, and launching accusations, that the French would be totally astonished, bewildered by the way their elected representatives behaved. I hope one day someone will conduct that experience now in the initial months of our Parliament. But the systematic violence, institutionalized violence, which calls to the harshest clashes when the country is going through an unprecedented crisis. I think that this does the worst service for the future of the country, the worst possible service to the future of our institutions. There is something deeply shocking when all families, all households in Europe are worried about their purchasing power, their incomes, whether they can heat their homes or travel. There's something truly shocking to see this concern is used as a pretext to seek out the most possible violent clashes for partisan benefits or group interests. So this, so we should certainly be invited to take into account expectations which are not closely linked to national European politics. Can I have a glass of water, please?
Il y a un vers de Victor Hugo qui dit « Donne-lui ».
There's a verse by Victor Hugo which says, at least give him something to drink, my father. Now we need to return to the issue of identity. Generally, political life gave the impression of, and it often simplifies things, that claiming one's historical identity, cultural identity, was on one side and European identity was on the other extreme, on the other side. And I believe that there's no reason to reject the legitimate request for identity among the peoples. I think there's a deep human requirement which comes from afar, where each person has the deep desire to define oneself in their own eyes and in the eyes of others. Who are we? Where do we come from? And this is a guarantee to know where we're going. And this claim is something which I think a group like ours has to take on board, because Europe is nothing more than having different identities living side by side. I'm saying this to our Basque friends, for example, to our friends from Madeira, and who we have who've joined us today. It's what we are and what has made us should endure among us. And when we make it felt that what we are and our identity would be threatened in future by something which is simply a melting pot, that will be going against the deep expectations of our peoples. And I think that we have very clearly to spell out that the path we are tracing out is a path which recognizing identities. Secondly, there is a deep claim for great desire for justice and for recognition among our peoples. When I look at the French society, and I'm sure it's the same in other countries, wherever I turn, in professional organizations, in the regions, in the associations, the feeling is always the same. I'm not recognized for what I am. I'm not given the floor, allowed to speak. I'm not involved in decision making. We haven't invented yet a society of recognition where through perhaps new institutions, everybody will be able to consider that they have their position and their role in decision-making. It's complicated because representative democracy, based on elections, give those in power the feeling that they have full legitimacy, and that those who are in opposition, that they have to put the government in the dock constantly. I think that the future decades we'll be living will make these issues more complex. And I believe that the path Emmanuel Macron had an insight. He attributed some of the responsibility in making use of this insight. He established a National Council for Refoundation, Reconstruction, as if there was a deep need for renewal and for re-legitimization. An election is no longer enough to provide legitimacy of the elected people. You can see that there are regular discussions with leaders who are saying, I was elected 1 or 2 years ago and I had this in my manifesto, so I am entitled to implement this. Things are more complicated because the time frame with the media means that very quickly statements and engagements become obsolete in the eyes of citizens too, and we need to re-establish legitimacy on a constant basis. It has to be rebuilt on a daily basis, and this insight of the French president, I think, is grasp something very important. I'm not going to tell you that this is going to be easy. If Stéphane won't say this, or the members of parliament will either. It may be one of the most risky enterprises to be conducted, but I think it's necessary, because when you see the loss of confidence which institutions face in the eyes of citizens, and the deep-reaching changes in the society we are part of, this means that it's right for us to deploy our imagination, even though this may lead to difficulties for us. And I know the members of parliament think that it's wrong to shift the debate or to create fora for debate elsewhere. I think that what I was speaking of, the term I used, refounding, is the right word, because the world we're living in is a world which needs deep issues to be re-examined. A year ago, the course of the planet, the economy of the planet, was the train of the world. They had 3 locomotives driving it to China, with changing development rates, growth rates over the years. The United States, and we had Europe with Germany in particular playing, being the driving force. So these three locomotives, these three engines, today all have question marks hovering over them. China sees its growth rate divided by 3, and all of a sudden it discovers the population crisis, which had been clearly taking shape for a long time, with a situation where foreigners are leaving, and perhaps Chinese power looks unfavorable with departure of the foreigners, signification of China, making China fully Chinese again. And there is a what I would call an anthropological crisis, because Chinese power has discovered what the single-child society means, and single-child society is a situation where nobody has uncles, aunts, brothers, sisters, or cousins, or nephews or nieces. A personal situation where there's only vertical relations, and which is so deeply upsetting that when the Chinese leaders decided to return the right to have more than one child to the Chinese families refused this in their practical behavior. This means that according to demographers who pursue the most exact science in our world, China will be losing 500 million inhabitants in the next 30 years. And I don't know if you can see what this means. There are countries in Europe where there are demographic crises because of the departure of young people. But in China, it's different. It's because there is a decline in the number of new births. In the United States, the crises are different, with a change in sociology, with the return of one of the most when the return to the most archaic emotions, which come from history, and a resentment which is expressed in wokeism in all American universities, and it's not a favorable situation for the country. And in Europe, the war in Ukraine has led to the discovery of fragilities which we all know of today, the energy crisis, and a feeling of imbalance created by the fact that for the first time after the war, a powerful state has invaded a neighboring state which appeared to be weaker to annex it. This is something which hadn't happened since the end of the war. Europe was built on the principle which was respect of borders. And beneath all this, inflation, which leads us to discover the spectre of impoverishment for our households. If we add to this all these factors, if you add up all these factors, in Germany, which has discovered that it was completely dependent on Russian gas, and its sovereignty was challenged. If you consider all this, then we discover a world which was totally unforeseeable. Just a year ago, 12 months ago, None of us could have imagined that we would have to face what we're facing now. And faced by these earthquakes and perhaps tsunamis, which these earthquakes might engender for all of our households, confronted by this, there are only two possible responses. And one is deathly responses for each of our medium-sized countries to enclose themselves and consider they're totally different from others, and there might be foes among their neighboring countries. And so all the nationalism and the populism which we've been talking about, only the second response can bring something, namely the establishment of a political grouping which is determined to defend, to construct and to promote a model of society and a civilization of the kind which practically exists nowhere else on the planet. This huge project of European construction is ours, not only because we've inherited it, and it's true that the constructors of Europe were in our political family, but also because it is here that we have the most committed actors, those who have accepted to face hostile public opinion, to defend an ideal, which is probably the best and the greatest which can be proposed to peoples. It's no coincidence this ideal of European Union is the only political construction which has not been obtained through force, which has not been achieved by one clan prevailing over others, but which are obtained by goodwill, generosity, and the carefulness of those who, coming from the war, decided to build peace, but not just the peace which was the end of hostilities, but a peace which was the construction of a different political project. This is why we are Europeans as well as Democrats, and this is a message which we address not only to the European people, but to the whole of the planet. I'd like to dwell on this.
Cette idée de démocratie qui est tellement menacée.
This idea of democracy that is so threatened actually has also a major democratic potential. We need to create a democratic international. We need to take on board the Congress Party in India, the Democratic Party in the United States, the Japanese Democrats, all those who in the world have accepted this idea that there was a political organization based on law and freedom, and that anyone could build the future, become a citizen and not a subject. Not subjected, but committed. And I shall conclude with the idea you mentioned at the beginning, Matteo. The traditional democratic ideals are under threat everywhere. We need a political form that is original, that responds to the fears, the reticences that are such that most of our citizens, namely the young ones, are not committed. They're afraid that they will become enclosed, that we will become regimented, and that someone will decide for them. And so, though we work in solidarity, we must have an idea of freedom. Easier said than done. We need to build democratic models that give to the committed a formation. And I'm saying formation in a city that invented the cursus honorum, that will make it possible to achieve the potential we hold. And finally, from the standpoint of communication, we need to prove that we shall be able to invent a political form where the originality of expression, the language we use, does not resemble the language proposed by those societies that make communication their job. There is a need for being original. There's a need to laugh. There is a need to risk, to find excitement. But society really avoids risks, so this is a major challenge, because on the base, it is from this that our regeneration as a society depends. It is on this that the commitment, a renewed commitment of young people depends, and the EDP needs to be a precursor in this, and I'm so happy that I've been able to spend this morning with you. Thank you.
Now our work are over. I would ask the leaders and all the delegation to come to the podium for just a family picture, and then you are free.